My wife left me after I lost everything. She didn't know I was testing her love and sincerity. Before we dive deeper, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. We will be excited to have you join our growing family of enthusiasts who enjoy the wonderful stories told on this channel. When I met Isabella, I was already wealthy, already established, already known in certain circles as a man who owned more than one company and controlled interests across logistics, finance, and private equity. And I never hid that from her because I had no reason to. We met at a charity gala, one of those events where crystal glasses clink too loudly and people pretend generosity is louder than ego. And I remember how she stood slightly apart from the crowd, holding her drink with both hands, observing instead of performing. I walked over, introduced myself, and she smiled in a way that didn't feel calculated. "So," she said lightly, tilting her head, "you're one of the men funding all this extravagance." Over the next few weeks, as we dated openly, as dinners turned into long conversations and long conversations turned into something deeper, she kept reinforcing the same idea again and again. "I don't need private jets," she told me once while we sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. "I don't need designer labels," she said another night while we walked hand in hand. "I just need honesty, presence, and effort." And I believed that I had found someone rare. Someone grounded. Someone different. I proposed to Isabella in a public gathering, one of those rare evenings where the city's most powerful men and women gathered in the same space. The room was filled with people who controlled industries, governments, investments, and futures. Presidents of companies, board chairmen, investors whose signatures could change markets. And Isabella stood beside me, radiant, confident, perfectly comfortable among them. As speeches ended and glasses were raised, I took the microphone, feeling the subtle shift in the room as attention settled on me. Because when someone like me stands up unannounced, people listen. I turned toward her. She looked surprised, her eyebrows lifting slightly, her hand tightening around her glass as she sensed something unfolding. "Tonight," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "we're surrounded by people who build legacies, people who measure life in acquisitions, valuations, and power." A few knowing smiles appeared around the room. Then I looked directly at her. "But the greatest investment I've ever made," I continued, pausing just long enough for the silence to stretch, "is the woman standing beside me." A murmur rippled through the hall. Isabella's hand trembled as she brought it to her mouth. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the ring, and dropped to one knee without hesitation. "I don't need witnesses to love you," I said, my voice softening. "But I want the world to know that everything I've built means nothing if I don't get to build a life with you." The room went silent. And then she said yes. But loudly. Through tears. Through laughter. Through hands that shook as she pulled me up and wrapped her arms around my neck, while applause thundered from every corner of the room. People stood. Glasses clinked. Power paused for love. Our wedding was not the kind people attend quietly. It was the kind people remember. From the moment the invitations went out, thick, textured cards sealed in deep navy wax, rumors began moving through the city like a slow, respectful whisper. The venue itself sat on the edge of the city, a historic estate surrounded by iron gates and long stone paths, where chauffeurs stood in tailored coats and waited as convoys of cars rolled in, sleek black Bentleys, extended Rolls-Royces, matte-finished Maybachs, and the occasional understated hypercar driven by men who didn't need to announce their wealth. I remember standing near the entrance, adjusting my cufflinks, watching influence arrive one vehicle at a time. A chairman of an energy conglomerate stepped out of a Rolls and laughed as he recognized me. "So this is the man who finally decided to stop conquering markets and start a family," he said, gripping my hand firmly. I smiled. "Even empires need a home," I replied. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, rare flowers, and aged wine. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over long banquet tables dressed in linen, so fine it barely wrinkled under glassware imported from Europe, while waiters moved with trained precision, pouring wines most people only ever read about. A sommelier leaned toward a guest and whispered respectfully, "This is a 1990 Chateau Margaux, only opened for occasions that deserve it." Laughter floated through the room, rich and effortless. Men spoke in low tones about mergers, upcoming elections, and acquisitions that would make headlines weeks later, while women compared travel stories not by countries, but by seasons and private villas. I overheard one executive lean toward another and say quietly, "If he loves like he invests, she's married to the safest future in this city." Isabella arrived moments later, and the room changed. Conversations paused, not out of obligation but recognition. She walked in wearing a gown that didn't scream luxury, but whispered authority, the kind that doesn't need validation. And when she reached me, she leaned close and said with a nervous smile, "Is it strange that I feel calm standing here, surrounded by all this?" I squeezed her hand. "Power is just noise," I whispered back. "What matters is who you hear when the room goes silent." She smiled. The ceremony itself unfolded slowly, intentionally, as though even time understood it wasn't meant to rush that day. Vows were exchanged beneath soft lighting while a string ensemble played quietly in the background, and when I promised to protect her, her eyes filled, not with tears of luxury but with trust. At the reception, speeches came one after another. A minister of commerce raised his glass. "I've negotiated with this man across tables where billions were at stake," he said, glancing at me, "and I can say this. If he's chosen her, it's because he knows value when he sees it." Applause followed. Another friend leaned over to Isabella later and said jokingly, "You realize you've married the most composed man in the city, right?" She laughed. "I know," she said confidently, "and he married someone who loves him, not his balance sheet." I heard that, and I believed it. As Isabella and I stood together, watching guests laugh, toast, and celebrate beneath lights that reflected off crystal and gold, she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "Whatever happens in life," she said softly, "promise me we'll never forget this feeling." I kissed her forehead and answered without hesitation, "Nothing could ever take this away." I didn't know then. That life has a way of testing promises made in abundance, and that love celebrated in excess is often the first to be measured when excess disappears. In the weeks that followed our wedding, as the glitter of the celebrations faded into the hum of our everyday lives, Isabella's words began to anchor themselves in my mind, like echoes that refused to dissipate, because no matter the villas, the cars, or the accolades that came with my name, she insisted repeatedly, tirelessly, that none of it truly mattered, that the only thing she had ever wanted and would ever want was the love between us. "I don't care about your cars, Julian," she would say, often while brushing her fingers across the steering wheel of the Bentley I had gifted her on our honeymoon, as though trying to convince herself as much as me. "I don't care about the trips or the designer bags or the jewels or the house. All I care about is us, and that you love me the way I love you." I would chuckle because I had spent a lifetime accumulating power, influence, and wealth, and here she was, reminding me with a solemn and gentle intensity that my money was meaningless in her eyes if the love wasn't there. "You mean it?" I would ask, watching her eyes, which always held that mixture of warmth and honesty. "Even if I gave away everything I own tomorrow, would you still love me?" Her lips would curl into that soft, knowing smile that I would come to memorize, and she would squeeze my hand firmly, never hesitating, never wavering. "Even then, Julian," she would say, leaning close enough that the scent of her perfume lingered in the space between us, "even then, I would choose you over every single thing money could buy." It wasn't a single declaration, but a constant refrain, like the repeated notes of a song that refuses to leave your head, and I began to notice how it shaped her actions as much as her words. She was humble, caring, attentive, endlessly curious about the world around her. And she treated everyone with the same quiet respect, whether they were chefs preparing our meals, waiters at a five-star restaurant, or interns working under her in the various foundations I had created. I remember one evening, sitting on the balcony of our penthouse apartment, I asked her softly, "Do you ever feel intimidated by the life I live?" She turned to me, intimidated. "No, awed, maybe," she said, her smile both playful and sincere. "But Julian, I don't care about wealth. I care about the way you see me, the way you choose me every day. That's the only luxury I'll ever need." And Isabella, blissfully unaware of the quiet tests I was preparing, continued to tell me, with that calm certainty that seemed to defy every materialistic instinct in the world. "Money doesn't define us, Julian. Love does. And that is the only fortune I need." Little did she know, the greatest test of that love was approaching. It began gradually, deliberately, the kind of measured steps that a man accustomed to overseeing empires knows will reveal character without creating chaos. I canceled our next private jet trip to Paris, suggesting instead that we spend a weekend in a modest countryside resort. Isabella tilted her head, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the dining table as she processed the news. "A countryside resort?" she asked softly, the words polite but the tension in her shoulders unmistakable. We could stay there." "Yes," I said evenly, meeting her eyes, my tone calm, but beneath it was the quiet certainty of a man testing the waters. "I thought it would be nice to experience something simple together without arrangements or expectations. Just us." Her smile was polite but tight, the kind of smile that hides hesitation behind social grace. "Of course," she said finally, though I could see her mind racing as she nodded, carefully, slowly, as though convincing herself that this change did not diminish the life she had grown accustomed to. The weekend arrived, and the resort was ordinary by all worldly standards. A small room with modest furniture, breakfast delivered by a friendly but unpretentious cook, no chauffeurs, no luxury cars waiting to whisk us away. The silence of normalcy pressed gently against our conversations, and I noticed her hands fidgeting with the napkin, the way her feet tapped softly against the floor in the quiet. And even as she laughed at my attempts to make a fire in the small hearth, I could feel the tension beneath the humor. "That's different," she said finally, leaning back in her chair, arms crossed lightly, a slight pout on her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. I guess I like it, but it's different, not like what we're used to." I nodded, stirring the tea slowly, savoring the simplicity as much as the observation. "It's supposed to be different," I said softly. "Comfort is what we're used to, but love doesn't require comfort to prove itself." She looked at me, her expression softening, yet still shadowed by a flicker of doubt. "I know you mean that," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "and I do believe you. I do. But it's hard not to think about everything we've had and why it mattered." That evening, back in our apartment, I delivered another subtle change. The shopping spree I had planned for her birthday, the one that would normally include dozens of designer dresses, shoes, and bags, simply didn't happen. Instead, I gifted her a single piece of jewelry, accompanied by a note that read, "True value is in the things we cannot buy. You are everything that matters to me." She read it quietly, standing in the center of the living room, and said softly, "Julian, you don't have to do this. I already have everything I could ever want." "I know," I replied, keeping my voice calm, keeping my posture composed, but feeling the pulse of the moment. "But I need to know that what we have isn't just attached to things. I need to see that our love exists even when abundance disappears." "I do love you," she said finally, letting the words hang between us like a promise. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her words fully. But instinct, honed from years of watching power shift and alliances break, whispered to me that true character rarely reveals itself in comfort. It whispers only in loss, in discomfort, in the moments when expectation is stripped away. And that was the beginning of the test, one I had not initially planned, but one that became inevitable. One evening in our apartment, papers spread across the dining table, laptops open. Julian, she said, her voice calm but tinged with a hint of disbelief, as she leaned forward and rested her chin in her hand. Why are there so many meetings about restructuring? What's happening with the funds? I took a breath, looking at her across the table, and tried to keep my tone even, though my mind raced with the precision of a man orchestrating a plan that only I fully understood. Isabella, I've begun moving some of my liquid assets into long-term structures, investments that will secure our future but limit access in the short term. I explained slowly, carefully, watching her eyes narrow slightly, the flicker of confusion, and perhaps fear passing over her face. She leaned back, crossing her arms, one eyebrow rising. So, you're losing money. I shook my head. I'm reallocating. I'm reducing immediate access. It's temporary, strategic, and it doesn't change what I have, only what is available for us in the present. Her fingers tapped against the table lightly, impatiently, a subtle signal that she felt unsettled. I don't understand, she admitted, her eyes scanning the stacks of financial reports. Why would you do that? You've worked your whole life for this wealth. Why remove it now? I followed her movement with my eyes, calm, steady. I'm not letting it disappear, I'm controlling it. But the lifestyle we've grown accustomed to, the trips, the designer dresses, the gifts, it's all paused. Things aren't looking great at the moment. She turned abruptly, her hands lifting in frustration. Pause. Julian, do you understand what you're saying? Pause means you're cutting everything we've had, and you didn't even ask me first. I told you I didn't care, Julian. I told you that I loved you for who you are, but seeing it actually vanish, it feels different. I stood and approached her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. That's the point, Isabella. Love isn't only for when everything is convenient and easy. Love is for the moments when life strips away certainty, when comfort disappears and all that remains is choice. She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the window sill as though grounding herself against a storm. Julian, I've loved you from the first moment I met you. Not for the money, not for the trips, not for the life you've created. I love you because you are you. But it's harder than I expected to see it change so suddenly. I reached for her hands, intertwining them with mine, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. I know, I said softly. I know it is, and that's why this is necessary, to see the depth of our love, to see if it's anchored in truth, not in comfort. She sighed a long, shuddering exhale and rested her head briefly against my chest, whispering, I love you, Julian, that hasn't changed, I promise. And in that moment, I allowed myself to believe her. It was late in the evening when I finally told Isabella the truth. Not the truth about my love, not the truth about my intentions, but the truth about our finances. The carefully orchestrated reduction of my wealth that had slowly stripped away the comforts of our marriage, revealing the core of what we were made of. We were sitting across from each other at the dining table, the faint glow of the chandelier above casting a warm halo over the papers, the numbers, the reality I had meticulously prepared. I leaned forward, fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table, my gaze fixed on her eyes. Isabella, I began, my voice calm but firm, I need you to understand something. Over the past few months, we've lost almost everything. Her eyes widened slightly, the first flicker of fear and perhaps disbelief passing across her face. She leaned back in her chair, fingers gripping the edge as though holding herself upright against the shock. What do you mean, almost everything? She whispered, the words trembling despite her attempt to maintain composure. I inhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle between us like a thick fog, and spoke clearly, without hesitation. I've arranged with my lawyers to liquidate and redirect over 95% of our assets. The company is in serious financial crisis, and I may be forced to file for bankruptcy. I reached across the table, placing my hand lightly over hers. She pulled her hand back, pushing it into her lap, her posture stiffening, her jaw tightening as she looked at me with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and growing unease. Julian, I don't know if I can, she admitted, the words coming slowly, almost reluctantly. I love you, I thought I did and I do, but I'm not sure I'm strong enough to watch all of this disappear. To watch everything we've had, everything I've known, change like this. I don't know if I can survive it with you. I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words hang in the air, understanding that this was the first real test. Not of my plan, but of the human heart when faced with loss, when confronted with the fragility of lifestyle and expectation. Her voice came again, sharper this time, tinged with anger and desperation. "Julian, I can't help you fix this. I don't have the skills, the patience, or the fortitude to rebuild what we've lost. I thought I could, I really did, but I can't. And I think it's time we face this honestly. I want a divorce." I blinked slowly, not because I was shocked. My plan had accounted for this possibility, but because I wanted her to speak, to articulate fully the fear, the disappointment, and the human instinct to flee when stability collapses. She leaned back, hands clutching the arms of the chair, eyes wide with a mixture of defiance and anguish. "I can't stay married to someone who is losing everything. I can't watch myself struggle to support a man, a life, a future that I'm not capable of saving. I need to be free from this. I can't be your partner in survival, Julian. I can't." I took a slow breath. "Isabella," I said softly, each word deliberate, "this isn't the end. This is temporary, a test of what matters, of what survives when the glitter disappears. If you leave now, it proves nothing about love, only about convenience. But if you stay, you will see the truth, and you will see it for yourself." She shook her head, tears glistening on her cheeks now, voice trembling as it cracked under the strain of pride and fear. I can't. I've made my decision. I'm sorry, Julian. I can't be the person who holds this together. I can't. And I want a divorce." I remained calm, almost eerily so, watching the storm of emotions ripple across her face, understanding fully that this was the crucible, the moment when true love or its absence is revealed. Not in abundance, not in comfort, but in the desperation of scarcity, in the clarity of loss. And as she stood, trembling, gathering herself, walking toward the door with finality in every step, I realized something I had known from the beginning. The heart reveals its truth when nothing else remains to distract it, and love is either unconditional or it is nothing at all. The morning of the divorce, the sun had barely broken over the rooftops when Isabella stepped into the small, local courthouse, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors, the echo bouncing through the quiet hallways like the anxious rhythm of her own heartbeat. She had requested secrecy, and the press, thankfully, had no inkling of the proceedings. It was a simple, almost mundane affair compared to the grandeur of our former life, and I knew she felt a mix of relief and dread, though she would never admit it. I arrived shortly after, dressed plainly, a dark suit, a simple tie. I wanted the scene to appear ordinary, as though the world itself had shrunk to this courthouse, to the quiet, almost sterile room where our fate would be decided. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, looked down at the papers before her and cleared her throat. "This court has reviewed the submissions of both parties," she began, her voice deliberate and measured. "In consideration of the facts and the assets presently held by both parties, it is the judgment of this court that the marriage between Julian Moore and Isabella Moore is dissolved." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. I could see her fingers tighten around the strap of her bag, her knuckles whitening as the words settled like stones in the room. "And further," the judge continued, lifting her gaze to meet Isabella's, "the assets owned jointly amount to a single property, a residential house valued at approximately $100,000. Ms. Isabella Moore shall receive $50,000 as a fair and equitable settlement, with no further claims to Mr. Moore's personal or business holdings." Isabella's eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly, and I could almost hear her heartbeat racing in the silence of the room. She opened her mouth to speak, to argue, but the judge's nod was final, unwavering. The papers were signed, the gavel struck, and just like that, the divorce was complete. She turned slowly, trying to mask her shock and humiliation with a faint smile that trembled at the edges. "Thank you," she murmured softly, her voice barely audible over the quiet shuffle of papers and shoes on the floor. She walked out of the courtroom, her steps uncertain, a shadow of her former confidence. I remained seated for a moment, letting the finality sink in, allowing the performance to take hold. I sighed heavily, letting the weight of heartbreak drape over my shoulders like a tangible cloak. To the casual observer, to anyone who might have glimpsed me, I looked devastated, defeated, broken. But inside, I felt only the quiet satisfaction of a test reaching its conclusion. 2 weeks passed. Life outside the courthouse moved on as it always does. People whispered, people speculated, but I remained distant, silent, invisible in the public eye. And then, as though the universe itself had a sense of irony, the news broke. Headlines screamed across every social feed and every business column. Julian Moore reclaims empire. Billionaire entrepreneur recovers fortune after strategic restructuring. The luxury properties were back. The yachts, the art, the private jets, they were all once again part of the life I had orchestrated quietly, methodically. I had recovered everything I had intentionally paused, and then some. It wasn't long before Isabella heard about it. Her phone rang one evening, her hands trembling as she stared at my name on the screen. Her fingers hovered, unsure, hesitant, before finally pressing call. "Julian," she said, her voice breaking, trembling as the words poured out. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Please, can we?" I let her words hang in the air, the silence stretching long enough to let the weight of our shared history settle between us. Before I spoke, measured, calm, unyielding. "It's over, Isabella. What we had, the life we built, the promises we made. It ended the moment you proved what mattered most to you." Her sobs caught in her throat. "Julian, please, I was wrong, I didn't mean." I lifted a hand, gently but firmly, cutting through the desperate pleas. "No, don't. You see, this was never about losing or gaining wealth. It was a test of love, patience, and resilience, and it revealed what I needed to know. That love in its truest form is unshaken by circumstances, and that you are not prepared for the absence of comfort." She gasped, a choked sound of disbelief and regret. It was a test." I nodded, keeping my voice soft yet unmistakably certain. "Yes, a test, and it failed not because of me, not because of circumstance, but because it revealed the truth about us, about you. And for that, Isabella, I thank you. You showed me who you truly are, and now we go our separate ways." Her voice broke again, barely audible. "Julian, I love you, I still." I exhaled slowly with the weight of finality. Love, Isabella, is not just words, it is endurance, it is proof. And what you revealed was that your love is conditional, that your heart still clung to what you could see and hold rather than what exists beyond perception. This is where our paths end. I hung up. And just like that, the chapter was closed. Isabella would remember this moment forever. The humiliation, the revelation, the truth laid bare. While I, standing in quiet resolve, allowed the world to witness my absence, even as my fortune quietly returned, stronger than before, a reminder that love is proven in adversity, and character is revealed when the glitter fades. If you found this story interesting, please remember to like this video and hit the subscribe button. Also turn on the notification so you don't miss out on any of our amazing videos. And lastly, endeavor to share this video with your friends. Thank you and see you in the next video.